All right, so good morning, everybody. This is Beth Collins with the Colorado Coalition Against Domestic Violence, and I am very pleased to have you all joining this webinar today with Christy Clemens, who has worked as an advocate doing frontline work in a domestic violence advocacy program in California. She's also worked as a program director for a community-based anti-DV organization there. And she's been involved with trauma-informed care projects, which you'll hear about, and currently is working with people who are incarcerated. So we're very happy to have her here and able to talk about her experience with seeking safety. And then we will reserve some time at the end to make sure that we have time for people's questions. I think that there's so much value in being able to hear from and learn from people who are in our same job role, who have maybe tried something a little bit ahead of us, and how we can ask questions about how does this really work for our work environment, and how does this sync up with our values and our perspective and our goals. Particularly a curriculum like Seeking Safety that wasn't initially designed for use specifically by community-based advocates. So I'm very excited that we're having this conversation. I'm very pleased to have all of you on. As I had mentioned before, but I'll repeat again, I believe that you do have the capacity to unmute yourself through the computer controls. So if you want to jump in with a question, you're welcome to do that. You're also welcome to use the chat or the question feature, and I will see those questions and comments as you enter them, and then I can either unmute you if you want to join by audio, or I can represent your question into the discussion. So we will be meeting for 45 minutes, and with no further ado, I will invite Christy to go ahead and begin.
Okay, well, good morning, everyone. Welcome. Thank you so much for inviting me to talk a little bit about my experience integrating trauma-informed services into domestic violence work and using the Seeking Safety curriculum in particular. I thought I'd start by just giving you a little overview of my history as an advocate. I was an advocate for about 16 years, 8 of that in direct service and 8 of that as a director of a program. So when I started domestic violence work in 1997, I worked in a program, and it was an emergency response program really focused on crisis intervention. We engaged all 22 law enforcement agencies in our county to develop a first response program. So when an officer was out at a domestic violence call, he would or she would page the advocate, me or another staff member, and we would call into the home and talk to both the survivor and the perpetrator at that time, and just basically triage, give them some information, safety plan with them, make a connection, and then we would get permission to follow up with them in a few days. And at that time, we would have a longer conversation and hopefully get them engaged in ongoing support and services. So that's really where I got my start in domestic violence. And at that time, we really viewed domestic violence as a human rights issue. That was the focus. We really focused on violence against women, and that domestic violence was really a lack of equality for women. And we used a social political model to address domestic violence. So the tools that we had as an advocate at that time in the field were, of course, the power and control wheel, so that we could talk about one's limit to autonomy, lack of equality, lack of access to resources. So we would outline, the dynamics on the power and control wheel, and kind of enlighten the survivor on that and those tactics that were used to control her primarily. And then, of course, we had the cycle of violence that explained kind of the crazy making and supported us to answer the question in terms of why she stayed in the relationship, with the lure of the honeymoon and the hope and things would get better. And also explain the escalating pattern of abuse. And then we had the safety plan, which really focused on the physical safety of her and her children and getting her out, how to do that most safely and efficiently. And the first stop was typically to the seclusion of a safe house, right? So that's what we had in our advocate belt to work with survivors. And then our role as advocates was really to work through the empowerment model. So the covenants of that were really just to listen and believe, to acknowledge the survivor's experience. We took a strengths-based approach in the agency I worked with, which supported us to focus on really what was working in the relationship, rather what was working for her in her life, and to use those skills to get out of the relationship. And another role that we had was really just to stand by her and give her information, right? Give her information on resources, about the dynamics that were happening in the relationship, about the impact that had on her and her children in terms of loss of control and autonomy, and support her to make informed decisions. And that, that worked pretty well, in the crisis intervention model. We're focused to get her out. But still there was a lot of other things happening. We had some frustrations as an advocate. People would go back to the relationships. There was a lot of complex issues in domestic violence with co-occurring issues that are coming up in terms of financial issues. Survivors were using substances at times, self-medicating and other things. So there was a lot of other stuff going on that we as advocates didn't get information about in our training. It was really just mostly on those core dynamics through this social political model. So in 2005, I transitioned into being the director of the domestic violence program. And in 2006, our state coalition designed some trainings for the 94 DV agencies in California. And one of those trainings was on trauma, and we were fortunate enough to work with Gabriella Grant, who now runs the California Center of Excellence for Trauma-Informed Care. And at that time, she did this series of trainings on just what was trauma. It was through this wave of organizations becoming trauma-informed. So we would give them some information on what that meant and how that could shift our policies and procedures in working most effectively with people. And then she also introduced us to the Seeking Safety curriculum. And for me, that really revolutionized, if you would, the domestic violence field, having this information about trauma. And it certainly gave me as an advocate working directly with survivors access to a whole nother range of tools and support that I could use when working with a survivor and supporting her through the decisions to leave or stay in a relationship, and certainly to move on in healthy ways in her life. So the big piece was just acknowledging that domestic violence is traumatic, right? I mean, we had always talked about domestic violence being dangerous, and that it, caused people fear, and it was immobilizing and disempowering and would, somewhat blinding. But we hadn't really recognized that domestic violence was traumatic. It sounds kind of silly, but and that because it was traumatic, and most survivors were experiencing complex traumas, right? Just complex events, multiple episodes of abuse in this this relationship that had ongoing tension and unpredictability, right? So people were experiencing kind of complex traumas, and that they had the potential to develop PTSD, right, and post-traumatic stress disorder symptoms, right? So being hurt by someone you love impacts how you think, act, and feel, and it really does disrupt your decision-making process. So although, again, we were giving people all this information to make informed decisions, their decision-making process was greatly disrupted because they were experiencing PTSD symptoms. And so I'm assuming everyone has some general understanding of trauma and PTSD, and PTSD being normal reactions to abnormal events, right? The symptoms of intrusive memories and hyperarousal and depression and numbing out and all of that. And then what happens with the disorder in the post-traumatic stress is that people then begin to have abnormal reactions to normal events and activities in their lives. So when they were coming in for services and describing, what, engaging with us and letting us know what was going on, right, their reactions were often not what we expected when they were going through the process moving forward in their lives, they were also disrupted often in the decisions they were making or in their engagement in services with us. You know, everyone was always welcome to come back, but often they did not, or they did, and they were doing things that we felt were pretty unsafe. We didn't really have the tools to have a conversation with them about that until we got the information on trauma and PTSD. So that really broadened our ability to work with people in safety planning. Still our, the basic tool that we had as advocates was safety planning. But instead of just focusing on physical safety, we were then able to address the emotional, mental, and spiritual elements of safety and really supporting people to move holistically into a place of healing. And so our vehicle for that was really the Seeking Safety curriculum and the information that we got from Gabriella Grant. So that's kind of us in a nutshell. So we adopted the Seeking Safety curriculum as one of our core support group curriculums. We also did the domestic violence. We developed a domestic violence specific curriculum that looked at the power and control wheel and the cycle and the other dynamics of abuse and control, and again more in that social political model. But we ran both groups. We chose to do both groups, Seeking Safety and this basic domestic violence group. And we did also adapt some of the domestic violence curriculum to be more trauma sensitive and trauma informed. And the reason why we like Seeking Safety is that it really addresses the basic, it supports survivors to develop the basic skills and get the information to heal from trauma. So you can heal from trauma. The 3 steps would be safety, right? Then you go back into remembrance and mourning. And then the 3rd step is reconnection with self. So in healing from trauma, and this is based on Judith Herman's work, the first step of safety can be done by anyone, right? Anyone can support someone to feel safe just by being kind and compassionate. And then also there's tools that you can use to support people to develop healthy coping skills and safe coping skills, which is what the Seeking Safety curriculum does. The second phase of healing from trauma, remembrance and mourning, is best done by a licensed clinician or practitioner. And that would involve someone, if they want, going back and reclaiming memories or loss of innocence and other dynamics to heal and to really mourn the loss of themselves in that experience. And again, that's most readily done by a mental health practitioner. And then the 3rd step, reconnecting to self, again, can be done through many different ways. Like you can even just take up a hobby, right? Or someone can support you through that process. So as advocates, very few of us were licensed clinicians or trained in mental health. My background's in politics. I have a BA in political science. So most of my training was done in the field. I, of course, did the 40-hour domestic violence training. And then I learned so much from the women themselves, and then trainings that my organization put me through, and then the bigger pieces of cultural competency and trauma than we got from our state coalition. Working with the LGBTQ community were the big trainings that we got as domestic violence organizations. So we weren't licensed, and we weren't really prepared as advocates to deal with some of the intense and broad issues that were coming up in people's lives. It was overwhelming. Again, we could stick to those main tools that we had, but beyond that, we felt somewhat hopeless as advocates for survivors and support people. So the Seeking Safety curriculum and the information on trauma really gave us another tool that was realistic for us to use. It made sense. It was really focused on skill building. So it's not really a process group, but more of a practice group. The focus of Seeking Safety as a treatment really focuses on developing safe coping skills and safety for oneself. And so the language of safety was something that we were very familiar with as advocates, and we could easily adapt into our training curriculum as well as into our philosophy and our values as advocates. Again, it just allowed us to broaden our definition of safety beyond physical to include the emotional, mental, and spiritual dimensions. So that's that. That's why we chose that.
So it sounds like it was a good fit in terms of it felt like it allowed that you and other advocates to better meet survivors' needs. And I'm wondering in what ways, like how did the advocates feel about it in terms of did it fit easily with both those core values of empowerment? And how did advocates feel about using a book that was written with words like client and therapist, even though they were not approaching it from that mental health perspective?
Okay, yeah. So I personally, as an advocate, I felt a lot of relief when I got this information, again, because it made sense. It made sense. It explained why survivors were and participants in our program were behaving in the ways that they did. It felt like a more holistic approach because, again, we were able to serve people in multiple dimensions in terms of supporting their well-being and in solid decision-making. And we were giving them tangible skills. It wasn't this kind of, we could see immediate results with people through giving them information about PTSD and the relief that they felt that they weren't crazy, that these were normal symptoms to this abnormal experience that they were having, and that they could heal from trauma and they could develop safe coping skills, which included, not putting themselves in a dangerous relationship, right? Staying in a dangerous relationship. So it was a very easy transition for us because everyone was very excited about the information. When we were trained in seeking safety, we were trained both by Lisa Najovitz and Gabriella Grant. The focus was never on having to be a licensed therapist or a clinician to do the curriculum. My understanding of the curriculum is that you can be trained, and anyone can do the curriculum and walk through the curriculum. It's very formulaic, and that's intentional because that builds safety and security in the support group. People can predict what's going to happen, and they know kind of the format of the class, and then can engage in the information at a deeper level. So if you go to a training and you read through the chapters and you have a basic understanding of PTSD, we found it was very accessible. So we were a small organization. We had 4 staff, and then we had about 80% of our staff was volunteer staff. So we put the volunteer staff, we made it a 50-hour training. It was a 40-hour mandate, but then we added 10 hours of trauma training to the curriculum. And then if the volunteers wanted to facilitate the Seeking Safety groups, they would go through the Seeking Safety training, and then they would also attend a weekly supervision meeting where we would talk about the topics and how they worked with the material and what came up for the participants in the group. So we had line staff and volunteers running the curriculum, and most of the volunteers were, undergraduates at our university. And they felt, comfortable. They certainly needed support and guidance, but we were confident that they were, implementing the curriculum to fidelity and engaging with the participants, in ways that were effective. So it was always a very positive experience for the staff and I think for the people that engaged in the groups.
I'm curious if you might be able to speak a little bit to how it felt for those advocates who had facilitated more of a traditional basic domestic violence psychoed group, which typically does not have that much of a formulaic structure and is kind of more open-ended. How did it feel for them to use Seeking Safety, where following that whole, check-in, quote, reviewing handouts, etc., is a really important part of facilitating that kind of group?
Yeah. Well, it's certainly an adjustment, I think, to get used to, the quote and then reading the handouts. There's a lot of reading, and then pulling out the trauma themes and the skills. But I think there's some value in acknowledging that, present focus groups are often best. I think we valued that in Seeking Safety, that it was present focused, like stuff has happened, but we really want to look at how does that impact you now, and how can we support you now to make better decisions for your future. Advocates got very uncomfortable having to go back into past trauma, past history, family history that people would bring up, because we weren't equipped to do that. So that we could keep the sessions present focus and really not get into the stories of what happened and the re-traumatization for the survivor on what happened, but just really look at how does that impact your decisions now. That was very freeing, and we had made that shift in our like psychoeducational domestic violence groups as well. We didn't just go around in a circle and everyone kind of share what was going on. For them, we had a very short update that we did in the beginning to kind of create the circle, but then we would move into more curriculum, and we had guided questions to talk about the power and control wheel of the cycle or other dynamics. It was more focused really on learning from one another about the topic rather than just sharing experiences of what had happened and where we were now. I mean, we would certainly address that to support the survivor, but that we would also refer people to one-on-one work to really do that, and use the groups more as a forum to kind of process and integrate the information about the core dynamics. Does that make sense?
Yeah, yeah.
So, it definitely takes some getting used to, I think, to do that, but there was also comfort in the predictability of the curriculum and the structure of the curriculum that was helpful. We had to support people to, be able to identify trauma themes and the skills that people were, present in each topic. What was the goal of the topic, the information to people to go away from. And I think there was a little bit of a shift in the kind of listen and believe model, but that was a very passive model for us. We spent a lot of time as advocates listening and not really doing, interventions that would support people to develop awareness about what was occurring for themselves, and deal with their PTSD symptoms, and then have skills to really move forward in their life. So that was a significant part of integrating the trauma information and the skills that we could develop from Seeking Safety into our one-on-one appointments, as well as in a group setting.
So Seeking Safety was initially designed to address co-occurrence of trauma symptoms and substance misuse. Can you talk a little bit about how it felt to use it, and how effective was it when you were working with people who didn't necessarily have substance misuse happening? And did that require some modification in how you used some of the sessions?
There's a high population of survivors that do self-medicate using substances. But it was always presented to us it was PTSD and substance use or other high-risk behaviors. And there's a lot of different high-risk behaviors that people engage in, from, unsafe sex, smoking can be considered a high-risk behavior, cutting, suicidality, continuing to be in a relationship where your life is being threatened is a high-risk behavior. So we just expanded unsafe coping to include any, it really was very broad. It was PTSD. We really wanted to focus on the PTSD symptoms and healing from PTSD, and how people coped, any negative ways that people were coping. And survivors are coping, right? They're surviving, right, the situation. So there's some healthy coping and certainly some unhealthy coping that they would identify that they were engaging in to live in that process of abuse. So we just expanded our definition of that, and that enabled us to work with people effectively. And again, it's about safety. So that languaging and that value was easy for us to adapt to. We talk, because some of the topics talk about very few physical safety, some of them, but it was really the emotional, mental, and spiritual safety. So we found that the curriculum filled a big gap that we had in our model of service provision, and so it was easy to integrate and very well received by the women. None of the people that attended our group ever had an issue with the curriculum. They all loved it.
Okay. And so I know that Seeking Safety can and often is offered as a drop-in group or an open group. And so did you find that people, like, did you notice anything about attendance? Like, were people more likely to keep coming back to one of the two types of group that you offered as a drop-in group? Did you find that it was helpful, even, you know, a newcomer joining in, that thanks to the structure that it really was something that could be effective for people, whether it was their first time attending or their 20th? Did people stick around for multiple you know, review of the same topic? Like, did you have long-term people that continued to find long-term value in Seeking Safety, or just what did that look like in terms of attendance?
Yeah, all of our groups were drop-in groups, and people do stick around for long periods of time, and I think people can hear, you know, engage in the topics multiple times and find value in it because they're different. You know, each time they hear it, and the group dynamics are different, so there's always new information that's brought forward from the group. We had a partnership with a substance use treatment provider in the county, and we ran groups on their site. We also ran groups Seeking Safety in our county jail with women, and it was effective there. And then we had groups in Spanish and in English at the center. And they were always very well attended. I think we would encourage people to go to both groups if they had time and wanted that level of support to get the information about domestic violence, and then more specifically PTSD. We would really kind of present both groups and support women to kind of choose and try out both and see what was most effective for them.
Great. Awesome. All right. Well, I am going to invite folks to join in with their questions or responses. So feel free to unmute yourself through your panel, or let me know by raising your hand on that feature also if you want me to try and unmute you from my side, or feel free to type in a question into that chat box. So what else would you like to have Christy share with us?
This is Christiana. Can you hear me?
Yes. Hi.
Hi. I'm wondering if you found that different times of the day or different times of the week worked better for different lifestyles, so to say, or like what were the factors that affected attendance, I guess?
Yeah. So we ran a lunchtime group, a group at noon, with the idea that people would be able to, you know, kind of slip out at their lunch break and easily attend a group at noon if they were really in a controlling relationship. And that group actually was, you know, fairly well attended, and we had a Seeking Safety group at that time that would sometimes have up to 20 people. We ran most of our groups in the evening, and we did provide childcare, and we also were able to give people food, so people could come to the group saying, you know, that this was a requirement for them to get food for their family, because that was helpful to some of our participants, and so that was a way that they could leave safely. But it was very important in the evening groups for us to have childcare available to the participants so that they could come with their kids. And then we would run groups for the kids too, sometimes teen groups and groups for the youngers. Does that answer your question?
Yes. Did you also experiment with days of the week?
Oh, days of the week. Our groups were on, I think the Seeking Safety group was Thursday afternoon, and the evening groups were also on Thursday evening. We didn't play around with the group days. We would, periodically poll the participants to see, if they could recommend any changes to the groups or, how the experience was for them. And we never, they were fine with the day that was the Thursday slot. That worked better for our staff, and so we just kept it at that. I would just ask, and again, you're going to get a snapshot of the people that are in that group. We tried to offer, we just had one evening group, and then we had the Seeking Safety on Thursday, and then we had the domestic violence group in the afternoon on, I think it was Tuesday or Thursday. Tuesday, I guess. Yeah, so we had one afternoon domestic violence group, an afternoon Seeking Safety group, and in the evening we had an evening domestic violence group.
So, Christy, we have a question that came in through the chat feature. So one of our participants says she's sorry that she missed your introduction, but she's curious to hear about your background and your start with this work, and if you wouldn't mind repeating a little bit of that. And then second, also, she's curious about the ways that things were adapted for immigrant or refugees.
Okay, so I got involved in this work kind of as a fluke. I mean, I was traveling out of the country and I came back to the Bay Area and I needed a job, and my friend worked at a domestic violence agency. So I got in just doing data entry for police reports for this program. It was an emergency response program that worked with 22 law enforcement agencies in the county, San Mateo County, as a first responding program. So we would call into when an officer was out at a domestic violence, and it could be a 243E1, a verbal or a physical assault. We would call into the home and then counsel the survivor and the perpetrator if he was there, and then follow up with the family a few days later. So I was doing data entry for that program, and then the advocate training opened up, and I took the advocate training to volunteer, and then a position opened up, and I got hired on, and then I was an advocate for that program for 8 years, and then I transitioned into being the director of a program for 8 years. So my degrees, I have a BA in political science, and I just kind of fell into the work out of my commitment to healing for myself and others, and my my passion of working with people and working with women, particularly at that time. So all of my training was hands-on training for the most part, that was provided by the organizations that I worked with, and then also by the women themselves that I worked with. So that's my background. Does that answer your question?
I think that's great. Yeah, thank you. Thank you for that.
So I'm not a licensed clinician. I'm not licensed. I have a BA, and then I have certificates of training in various, like Seeking Safety. I did that training several times, and other curriculums and trainings. So in terms of working with the immigrant population, we had our main group is Spanish speakers in California and in Santa Cruz County in particular. When I was in San Mateo, we had groups in Tagalog for the Filipino community, but in Santa Cruz County, it's mostly Latinas, and so we had services in Spanish, and certainly adapted curriculum somewhat, I think, just in terms of integrating an understanding of cultural differences and cultural norms, and in supporting people. Our philosophy was we meet people where they're at, and so we would do that, just more of an understanding of an individual's experience, and how that impacted their decision making at the time.
So we have 5 of the participating sites here in Colorado have advocates who are bilingual in English and Spanish, and they have the curriculum in both languages, and may recruit groups that are English-speaking, Spanish-speaking, or maybe a mix. So we're experimenting to see how is that going to work. And then the participant who had posed that question, she works specifically at a refugee resettlement organization and has contact with people from a number of different national and ethnic and linguistic backgrounds. And so we're very curious here in Colorado about how other people have approached any kind of modification, adaptation, adding in other activities, changing up pieces like modifying the check-in questions or the check-in format, or I don't know, just do you have any sense of how, you know, maybe the bilingual advocates that were offering it that you're familiar with, was there anything that they brought in or that you think might have helped it really have resonance for people from other cultural backgrounds?
Yeah. Well, we didn't modify the curriculum because the curriculum is designed and I think most effectively facilitated in the format that's outlined. So to start with a quote and then go through the handouts. I mean, one thing I think with the curriculum that you have to be sensitive to is the reading level, that there's a lot of reading. And so we would adapt for that, you know, across the board just by giving people, you know, you have the people that like to read, the people that don't, or any assistance that people needed in reading. So that was one of the main barriers of the curriculum, is just the reading of the handouts and the languaging of that. But beyond that, I think it's a very, very accessible curriculum. We didn't modify it in any way because we wanted to do it to fidelity. I think you can, you know, for teens and to mix it up a little bit, you can integrate some arts activities. I've heard that people have integrated, you know, collaging or various kind of art activities into it. We would also give people things, you know, kind of for any group, you know, things for people to hold or draw or, you know, to keep their attention on the group. Some people need that as a way to stay focused. So we tried to accommodate mostly for learning differences and learning styles was the main thing that came up for us. But yeah, we didn't mess with the curriculum itself.
Okay.
Because I think it's really accessible. I think the spirit of any kind of trauma work is just to kind of lighten it up and make things general, you know, support people to make sense. People's symptoms make sense given the experiences that they've had. So that's always opens up the conversation and helps people feel comfortable when they share, like, yeah, that makes sense, you know, that you would do that. A lot of people that experience trauma have a similar response, and you know, would you be interested in hearing another way to do it? So it's always in an inquiry, a positive inquiry about the topic, not about the person, but just about the theme and the commonality that we have. So that, I think, always kind of engaged people in a way where they felt comfortable and connected to others in the group.
So that's helpful in terms of thinking about that group cohesion. We also have a question kind of like backing up a little bit in terms of outreach, especially to Spanish-speaking communities. So the question is, how did you present this training to the Spanish-speaking community? How did you catch their interest to even then join group and then, you know, and then get this learning and this sense of community within the group environment? Is there anything about outreach?
Yeah, I think we didn't do it any different besides just adapting the language, right? I think we changed the group. We call it Seguro para Dentro y Afuera, Safety Inside and Out, was the name that we had for the group. So, you know, you can change the name not call it seeking safety if it best suits your group and supports their buy-in. A lot of the Spanish speakers that we, monolingual speakers, were, immigrants and had various different traumas besides just the domestic violence, the trauma of immigration, often leaving a war-torn country or a country that experiences high volumes of gang violence and threat. Even again, living in a country that's hostile to immigrants can be traumatizing. So the curriculum spoke not only to what was occurring in the relationship, but it supported them to heal from other types of traumas or complex PTSD that they had experienced and that were impacting their decisions now. So that's another benefit of the curriculum, is it's multifold. Many of our survivors, a very high population, have an experience of childhood sexual abuse, and the domestic violence was just more of a symptom of that deeper, younger trauma that had occurred in their lives. So the curriculum really gave us access to healing at multiple levels and supporting people to find comfort and skills and support to address, the myriad of issues that they were facing. So I kind of got off topic on that, but I would just say it wasn't a hard adjustment, I think, because we really valued the material. I mean, you have to be bought in, right? Like a shoe, people can sell anything as long as the person selling it is really passionate about what they're doing and believes in the message, right? So for our advocates, we really strongly believe in the curriculum and the message of the curriculum and the opportunity it provides people to really move forward in their lives and be safe and feel comfortable. And so I think in the spirit of that, our facilitators presented and engaged with the material and with the participants, again, out of this sense of deep inquiry and support that was therapeutic in and of itself. Just the relationships that were established in the material, through the material, I think was of value to them. So I would say if you're going to do it, really just embrace the curriculum and the material and the experience of the people engaging in the group, and that in and of itself will have a positive effect on the community.
Great, thank you. All right, so we have time for like one more question if we have it. If anybody wants to unmute or to type it in. So the last question then that we'll end with is, I know that the curriculum author, Lisa Najovitz, believes that facilitating, seeking safety, oftentimes leads to greater job satisfaction on the part of the people who are facilitating the group. And I was wondering if you have any thoughts about that claim.
Yeah, I would say most definitely that was my experience as a line staff, and it was my experience also as the director of the program working and so coaching line staff and also developing the curriculum for our training. Is that, as I've said before, the trauma piece, and particularly the safe coping skills and the opportunity to heal from PTSD and develop safe ways to manage oneself in terms of their emotional, mental, physical, and spiritual safety. That was always the missing piece for us as line staff and advocates, not with a clinical background. So it really opened up an opportunity for us to have tangible results. We could see that we were making an impact with individuals when we gave them this information. It supported them to make sense of their circumstances and their decisions and their future, based in kind of like really important, realistic information and knowledge about how they had dealt with the circumstances of their lives, and to move forward in really positive ways. So it had been nothing but positive. I mean, I do seeking safety now in the jail with men and women. It's a curriculum that I wouldn't live without. I mean, if I would cut every program that we have before I'd cut seeking safety.
Wow.
Yeah, I just think it's such valuable information.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
All right. Well, we are at the end of our agreed upon time, and I absolutely appreciate, Christy. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. I hope it was helpful. Yeah, and please, just you can anytime, you can ask me any questions. If
good.
anything else comes up after this, or as you're integrating the curriculum, I'm more than happy to talk to you or refer you to my partners in the movement out here in California.
Wonderful. Great. Thank you
Okay.
very much.
Thank you.
Thanks everybody
Take
for
care.
joining. Have a good rest of your day.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.